Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful for the SNP for calling this debate, because as parliamentarians, I think it's absolutely right that we should be debating in this chamber the issues which are of most importance to our constituents at the time when it's high on the political agenda. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about the cost of living and what we can do about it. And we heard in his opening remarks from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury the long list of targeted assistance that the government is providing, and I will come back later in my speech to dwell on some of those. But overwhelmingly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the best solution for cost of living squeezes is high levels of employment and increased levels of pay when you are in employment. And it's because of the government intervention in response to the COVID pandemic that we have an employment field that is so strong at the moment. The government intervened right at the start of this pandemic to save jobs through the furlough scheme, which supported more than 1 million jobs in Scotland alone, the self-employment scheme, and I have to refer to my previous Register of Interests entrance, through the Business Bounce Back Loan Scheme and the C-Bills. These saved thousands of jobs, including in the business that I was formerly had the honour to be the managing director, where without a C-Bill, that company, which employs over 1,000 people, including several hundred in Scotland, would very likely have gone to the wall. And it hasn't, and it's now growing again, although probably because I'm no longer directly involved in it, and it's creating many hundreds more jobs, both here and in America. So the impact of all that was that we did not suffer from 12% unemployment, which was the estimate of economists at the time. But we now have, as we leave this dreadful pandemic behind us, I hope, 4.2% unemployment throughout this country. And in my constituency of Broadland, it is currently at about 2.3%. So instead of having a jobs crisis where people need jobs, the crisis that we have in my constituency is the lack of available people to fill the jobs which are available as our businesses grow. And it's always better, Mr Deputy Speaker, to have good jobs with rising wages, which I'll also come on to, than relying on a status solution of increased benefits under universal credit, with the exception of the taper rate. So the reduction of the taper rate from 63% to 55%, whilst that doesn't make good tabloid headlines, all those involved in that part of the economy know how important that injection of about £2 billion into the pockets of those who are least well off as they move from benefits into employment. That is incredibly important, and I'm really grateful to the government that they focused, instead of the attention-grabbing £20 a week part of the universal credit, that they focused government firepower on the taper rate, because that's where it can do most good. So there's now more employment in this country than in pre-pandemic times, over 400,000 more jobs, and we should celebrate that. But employment is only the first issue. The second issue, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the amount of pay you get when you are employed. I've already made reference to universal credit taper rate, which is hugely important. We should not underestimate how important that is. But the other factor, of course, is the hourly rate that you receive when you work. And we have got both national data. Yes, I will give way on that point.
On that point, and he's right, it's not so much about jobs, it's about earnings. I think the average worker would be better off working in the UK and perhaps in one of the Nordic countries like Norway or Denmark.
There's a trade-off, isn't there, between earnings and taxation, what you get to take home. I don't have the data. The honourable member, I confess, I do not know the full tax rates in Nordic countries. But what I can say is the hourly rate in this country has been rising consistently under this government because of the national living wage, a Conservative government development. The most recent rise of 6.6% to £9.50, which is well above the inflation rate as it's forecast to be at an average of 4% for the rest of this year. And that's just the latest in a long line of above-inflation hourly rate rises under the national living wage. And from my local experience, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've already made brief reference to the localised wage pressures to attract new staff in my constituency. And I've spoken to numerous businesses where they have already told me that they are raising their hourly rates above minimum wage in order to attract good new staff. And there is a whole swathe of businesses, rather like the one that I had the honour previously to lead, where their hourly rate, although it's not the national minimum wage or the national living wage, is in some ways pegged to it, and so it has a positive effect to hourly rates right across the economy. Yes, I'd be very happy to give way.
Full to him for giving way. Just on the point of the minimum wage, the Living Wage Foundation has classified in London an hourly rate of £11.05, outside London £9.90, which is significantly higher than the minimum wage rate set by the government, which former Conservative government under George Osborne, when he was a Chancellor, branded it, changed the branding from national minimum wage to national living wage. Does he agree with me that the government should support the Living Wage Foundation and the rates set by them independently?
To the honourable member for that intervention. The government is on a journey to get to 2/3 of medium incomes under the national living wage, and it's making really good progress, above inflationary progress, to get there. And we have to balance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the needs of the recipients of hourly rates, as well as the viability of the businesses which actually pay those hourly rates, and they need to thrive as well. I've already made passing reference to the long list of assistance that the Chief Secretary of the Treasury made reference to in his opening remarks. But the particularly important ones from my perspective are the Household Support Fund, £500 million going directly towards utilities support, the Warm Homes Discount, which reduces the price of heating by £140 per household. That's at a cost of £200 million to the taxpayer, as well as cold weather payments, which provide £25 per week to up to 4 million people in this country. So the government has taken active steps, really proactive steps, to support those most in need, while supporting the entire economy of our country in Scotland and elsewhere. And if the SNP were really worried about this, they would reduce their income tax, which costs £800 million more to taxpayers in Scotland than to the rest of the United Kingdom. And as I've heard, I was shocked to hear that it applied to taxpayers earning just over £27,000 per year and above. And they would also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, support continued access to North Sea oil and gas reserves, and they would regret the opinion of Nicola Sturgeon in her assertion that she would not give the go-ahead to the Cambo oil field, because we need security of supply, and we need to support our domestic extraction during the period of transition between now and 2035 that supports our domestic prices and helps us in our transition to net zero, because it's the Committee on Climate Change themselves recognise that we need oil and gas resources between now and 2035, and I will give way.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable member for giving way. I rise to my feet as somebody who actually did work in the oil sector. That's not, however, what I want to address. The furlough scheme, when you think about it, such as my constituency, meant that that money that was paid out was re-injected back into the local economy and indeed the UK economy. It wasn't salted away in Zurich. So can I just say that in terms of supporting families through these hard times, that the money doesn't go into black hole, it is in fact recycled, which can in fact be clawed back by corporation tax on companies and so on. And perhaps it would be a good thing if all of us, including HMG, Her Majesty's Government, looked at that as we tackle the problem of fuel poverty, which I think is probably lies before us.
Very grateful to the right honourable member for his intervention. I know that the Treasury are attending this debate. I'm sure they are listening very carefully to what he had to say. But in conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is a difference between grandstanding on these issues, what the SNP appear to be doing. There seems to be a certain amount of virtue signalling here, compared to what the Conservatives have been up to in government, taking practical steps to improve the lives of people right across the United Kingdom.